I'm Chris Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and this is another in my continuing series of commentaries on the Liber Fructus or Centiloquium attributed to Ptolemy. Today we'll be talking about Aphorisms 5 and 8. These both relate to fate and provide two different but also complementary explanations of the operations of fate that we deal with as an astrologer. So let me read Aphorism 5. One skilled in the science may evade many effects of the stars when he knows their nature and diligently prepares himself to receive their effects. This is Aphorism 8. Sapiens, a wise man doth cooperate with the celestial operations and doth assist nature as the husbandman in the ploughing and preparing his ground. So let's go back and look first at Aphorism 5. Now, right off the bat, I'm not sure how much I like this aphorism in a way. I see, again, all the aphorisms, sometimes I'm in agreement with them, sometimes I'm not. This one, I think, I'm not sure of the language, if it really accords with how I think about fate. It starts off and says, already evading. And I think that's a very interesting concept. First of all, that's saying, well, fate is negative. It's bad stuff's going to happen to us. And that certainly seems to accord with our day-to-day experience. And I think it's certainly a view that's going to be very attractive to moderns. I think that fate is seen as people don't even want to believe that it exists, partly because of the scientific, atheistic materialistic view of reality, where everything is random. So the idea of any patterning at all, other than sort of the physical causality, is not accepted. I think in the back of people's minds, however, they do believe in it, and in fact they see it as something evil, though. I mean, fate is this outside force. It's blocking us. It's stopping us from getting what we want. And ultimately it seems very unfair. And, at the root of it, I think there's this idea that, if I really want something really badly, there's something really unfair about me not getting it. And that seems to me to be a very childish view. And it's easy enough to see in other people and children, but when it comes to ourselves, when we've got something very visceral that we want very badly, we do tend to fall back on that attitude. And it's irritating to have that brought up to us, that we can't get what we want. But ultimately, when we want it, when we need it, we seem to think that we should have to have it. And yet, as we get older, as we get more experienced, we realize it's just not true. I mean, clearly there's many situations where we don't get what we want. And so at that point we can shake our fist at the heavens, we can bemoan our fate, but I'm not sure if that is really that helpful. And again, with this aphorism, if we look at the language of it, it says you can evade many effects of the stars, but you must prepare yourself to receive their effects. So in a way, it's almost contradictory, the aphorism, if you take it that way. If you're really trying to evade, but you can't. Essentially, the effects are going to be received, so you're reduced to basically dodging them. And I think, in fact, what this aphorism is getting at is the idea that in a situation, there often is some flex. Now, and this is what the skill of the astrologer can help us figure out. First of all, what's going to happen, and then how much flexibility in the situation is there? Sometimes there's a lot, and sometimes there's not much flexibility. And I think that's one of the real skills, particularly horary astrology, is looking at the chart and saying, well, you're pretty much stuck with the result, or actually there's something maybe you can do about it. But nevertheless, the situation is what it is. And that's what we must, as astrologers, recognize. What is the true situation? What is likely to happen? So if we look at Aphorism 8, that I like a little bit better. I think it's a little easier to swallow, and I think it's also a little more accurate, at least it's coming across to our preconceptions. And that says, the wise man, in this case the astrologer, hopefully a wise man or a wise woman, is like a gardener. And the gardener knows the seasons, understands, the rainfall, understands the weather in their area, knows their sunlight patterns, and you can go and prepare the ground, you can take all the weeds out, get rid of the bad seeds, and plant the seed that you want. But ultimately, you don't control, as the gardener or the astrologer, you don't control the growth of the seeds. You didn't make the seeds. You don't control the sun. You don't control the weather. You don't control the sunlight. But what you're trying to do is first recognize these patterns and then align yourself with them. And in fact, as this aphorism says, you can then assist nature. You know, humans with our level of consciousness have a potentiality to see events and actually complete them. And I think that's one of the key insights of alchemy, is that alchemy is looking at natural processes and then actually helping those natural processes to take place. Not avoiding them, not wrenching them out, not forcing them in the way that you would like to have them or your ego self would like to have them, but actually acting in cooperation with nature for this greater result. And so again, as you sow, so shall you reap. And so I think that Aphorism 8, I think, is probably a better metaphor. At least I think it hits us better and helps us, opens us to a better understanding of this process of fate. And I think that pulls us to this bigger question, which is, what is fate? You know, and what are we dealing with here as astrologers? And so, even though these aphorisms speak about the effects of the stars, is that really what's happening? Is there some sort of energy coming from the stars that are forcing us to do things or forcing the circumstances? As I become more experienced as an astrologer, in my daily practice and also then in my thinking about the philosophy and the theory of what I'm doing, I'm increasingly pulled towards Plotinus's view that the stars are not in themselves causes, but are in fact cycling, and that the stars themselves obey deeper spiritual cycles. And because the cycles of the stars are so obvious, we can see them very clearly. And so if we can figure out which cycle the stars are on, that's the same as the cycle that's involved with events we're at, for example, a horary question. The timing of the horary gives us in alignment with the heavens. But again, what we're doing is we're looking through the chart, we're looking through the cycles of the heavens to that deeper underlying spiritual pattern that is in fact controlling or causing and underlying the material event or circumstance that we're looking at. So that's really what's happening here. This is not so much about the stars themselves and what they're doing to us, but rather this deep underlying spiritual patterning. And so, you know, our view of fate as moderns is that, as I said, it's an outside force, it's blocking us, it's evil. There's a famous saying that fate guides the wise and drags the unwilling. And I think that's really pointing us to what's going on here, and why I think Aphorism 8 is excellent, because it's talking about these underlying patterns and cycles in nature that we can cooperate with, and that our job is cooperation. And so it also points to the view that a little higher view, a little more wise view of fate is as providence. And providence is the benefic interweaving of all the causes and events in the cosmos. So that there's a patterning, there is an underlying patterning to events. And that ultimately that patterning is positive, or at least has positive possibilities that we can work with. Fate is in fact the patterning of life. And our fate is who we are and what we're put here to do. So to dislike our fate is like the acorn that does not want to be an oak. And there's really it's not very useful, it's frustrating, and refusing to accept who we are and accept what our plan is ultimately fruitless. And so in the end, astrologers really we're students of fate and we're votaries of fate. This is our, in a sense, the spirit that we are aligned under. And the more we understand fate, the more we understand the patterning of our existence, the easier it is for us to accept it. And ultimately, there's really no point in not accepting our fate, since it's going to happen anyway. And in the end, there's nothing we can do about it. And that seems very frustrating to moderns, but that's the reality of it. When we accept that, though, then we can align ourselves with it. Ultimately, the only way to escape our fate is to stop being us. And so that's what enlightenment actually is. So if we realize our true nature is the cause of the cosmos. Our true nature is of consciousness. But that's not bound by any individual patterning. That's because we become and identify ourselves with a complete patterning and complete consciousness of the universe. Now that's beyond me at the moment. But astrology, as exemplified by these aphorisms, is giving us a window into that understanding and that deep patterning. And that, I think that's really the wisdom of these aphorisms. And so I'm really happy to be able to share this. And again, I look forward to talking with you on further commentaries on the Centiloquium and Liber Fructus here on Renaissance Astrology.